Wait, let me make sure I'm standing in the right thing. Okay.
So whenever you're ready, you go ahead.
All right, everyone, now that we've found out what happens in the mouth, let's move away from there and let's get down here to where the action starts to really happen. So we talked a little bit about the parts of the mouth. Let's see what happens down here. We have the stomach, and of course that's where your food's going to go, unless you had gastric bypass surgery. Here we have the stomach. It's going to move through from the stomach, which we'll talk about first, to the intestinal tract. We'll start with the duodenum, move to the jejunum, the ileum, and eventually the large intestine or the colon. And now, it's not just about the digestive areas here, it's also the organs that are associated. So the pancreas, the liver, the gallbladder, they're all going to be very important in this process as well. And one thing to keep in mind, you obviously think about your mouth as kind of being outside of your body. I can put my finger in there and it's outside of my body, but the intestinal tract from the mouth to anus technically is outside your body. That might be strange to think about, like, no, my stomach's in there. But it's a front to keep things out of the blood, of circulation, of the lymph, of your actual systemic organs. So the stomach is in some ways an immune component, as is the intestinal tract, keeping out what needs to stay out, bringing in what needs to stay in, and what you didn't need or you didn't want, that gets excreted. So keep that in mind as we talk about absorption, particularly, that we're starting outside the body in this narrow tube going all the way through our actual body. So what's happening here in the stomach? Let's look a little bit about that. One thing to note is the stomach is a muscular organ. It's very important for muscular health to keep your stomach moving. You want your stomach to move. You can sometimes feel it and hear it. When we think about, what's funny is you think about your tummy, you go, oh, I have a tummy ache. Maybe you rub down here when you were a little kid. Your stomach's actually kind of up here. So this is your intestine. So you can say I have an intestine ache now that you're a smart nutrition student. But yes, first place we're going to go here is our stomach. And in order to move your food around, you'll note that we have multiple directions of muscle. And we're also going to be controlling entry and exit from the stomach with two sphincters. We see here the esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter, and then you're at the bottom, the pyloric sphincter. So we have the esophageal sphincter, and then down here, the pyloric sphincter. And so the body's going to go ahead and bring that food in, and the muscles will contract just like the muscles when you make a muscle, just like that. You'll see contractions that moves what we now call chyme. We don't really say like, oh, there's my sandwich down there anymore. We talk about all the food you ate. I had a friend once that said, loved to mix their foods, and then another friend that didn't. And the friend that loved to mix their food says, hey, it's all going to go to the same place anyway, which is true. If we looked at what's in your stomach, a lot of that is going to be churned and mixed up together. Now, the better you chewed your food, the more broken down it will be when it gets to the stomach, and that's an advantage for digestion because now we're going to have a lot of enzymatic action starting, the very first start of acidic activity on the chyme, and then that little bit of mechanical action moving it around, kind of mixing, like the mixing bowl of the body. And then the first place in the intestinal tract that we'll visit is the duodenum. So let's see what happens here in the stomach. So that when we first have food, we'll see this hormone gastrin. Gastrin will be released, and that will start to signal for these gastric secretions. So keep that terminology in mind, this idea of secretions. What kind of things are secreted then? We do see hydrochloric acid secreted, and that is very acidic. It is an acid. And one of the things that it'll break down, it can help kill off some bacteria, but it'll help start to break down some of your proteins. And we specifically talking about denaturing those. We'll talk more about that when we talk specifically about protein, but it's the idea of starting to break down that complicated polypeptide. It's kind of like beating an egg. If you have a hard egg, you crack it open, and it looks like an egg yolk and a bunch of white. You mix that all up. Now it does not look like the same anymore. You've denatured it. You've taken away its nature, in a sense. Now, this hydrochloric acid will also help activate one of our first enzymes here. We see pepsinogen. It's going to be activated to pepsin. And why do we want to do that? Well, this is what we call a proteolytic enzyme. And a proteolytic enzyme breaks down something we haven't seen yet, protein. So we have some breakdown here of protein, a little more here of protein. What we won't see is any breakdown of carbohydrate in the stomach. We will see this start to break down. Now, why did we have this inactive form? So this is inactive, and this is active. Think about that for a minute. So there are proteins in your stomach. Would we really want a proteolytic enzyme hanging out actively in our stomach when we're not eating? Probably not a good idea. We want to keep our stomach, not digest it. So yes, we want to keep some of these enzymes inactive. In addition to this, we'll see gastric lipase. And like the adrenal lipase, it is going to break down our lipids or our fats. Okay? And again, we'll talk more about this when we get to each subsection of macronutrient, but this is a great introduction to how the digestive anatomy works.